Today's episode of the No-Till Market Garden podcast is brought to you by Growers & Co. One of the more exciting developments in recent years is that thanks to Jean-Martin Fortier, the market gardener, and his team, there is now a clothing, tool, and apparel company that was built for exactly the type of work we talk about on this show. I know that I have personally grown tired of looking through workwear websites and catalogs built for fishing or carpentry to find what I need for market gardening, so I was thrilled when Growers & Co. came to fruition, and even more thrilled when I tried their clothing. They have done absolutely excellent work. Their clothing is well made and well fitted. The tools are designed by growers and made to last. There is also a magazine, a really excellent magazine that Growers & Co. is putting out twice per year with a focus on small-scale farming, but also that represents the dignity, skills, and creativity required to do this work. I love the clothes. I rock the Muscovich vest a lot, the shirts and hats, all of it. Anyway, follow Growers & Co. on Instagram and all the platforms and check out what they have to offer at growers.co. Today's show is also brought to you by BCS America.
BCS two-wheel tractors are often mistaken for just another rototiller. But these compact power units are truly superior pieces of farming equipment. Engineered and built in Italy, where small farms are a way of life, BCS tractors are built to standards of quality and durability expected by professional growers. Available for a fraction of the cost of four-wheel tractors, BCS will perform a lot of jobs more safely and efficiently than their four-wheel cousins. Jobs like shredding cover crops, spreading compost, and preparing seed beds in covered hoop houses without compacting soil, mowing on steep slopes with your feet safely on the ground, cutting grass and brush under fence lines and low trees, clearing snow on footpaths, and more. Don't just take our word for it. Join more than 2 million people in over 80 countries who have discovered the advantages of owning Europe's most popular two-wheel tractor. To learn more and find your nearest dealer, visit bcsamerica.com. That's bcsamerica.com.
Huge thanks to our show sponsors. All right, let's jam. Hey, you all, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to the No-Till Market Garden Podcast, episode 25. Season 3 got another great episode for you all this week. This one with James Burnson of Radical Roots Farm in Snohomish, Washington, who is just a really great grower. I love watching this farm, and we dive into many details of his farm, including how James has figured out combining the paper pot transplanter with deep compost mulch. We dive deep on 3 different crops, including leeks, beets, and arugula. We talk disease and pest management in a wet climate, tools, different bed flipping options, and so much more. Before we get into it, a couple things. In the month of April, I'm going to be shouting out everyone who signs up for the Patreon page. If you have enjoyed Season 3 and are ready for a jam in Season 4, now is a great time to sign up. That's patreon.com/no-till-growers. Again, I'll shout out everyone who signs up this month at any level. Another way to support our work this summer is to simply order a copy of my forthcoming book, The Living Soil Handbook. It is on pre-order now at no-tillgrowers.com, but ships in July. When you order it from us, from no-tillgrowers.com, the proceeds go into making more content. That's a win-win if ever there was one. Also, I did an interview with John Kempf for the Regenerative Agriculture podcast last week, which you can check out wherever you get your podcasts. So, lots of fun stuff. Anyway, enough from me. Let's get into this amazing conversation with James Burnson of Radical Roots Farm. James Burnson, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Jesse. Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. I'm really excited to be here.
And I'm excited to have you. I guess let's start where we always start. Where are you located? How much land are you working on? And those sorts of things.
Yeah, so my name is James. I use he, him pronouns. And our farm is located in Snohomish, Washington. The whole property is 1.5 acres with roughly a half acre in cultivation, which turns out to be like 150-foot beds. And 20% of these are in our unheated greenhouses.
What's the width on those beds, you said?
Yeah, so we're just using the standard 30-inch wide beds and 18-inch walkways.
Then talk a little bit about where the produce is going. Can you flesh out your marketing a little bit for us?
Of course. So, of course, with COVID, everything kind of changed a lot. But in terms of 2020, we were kind of split between 80% retail and 20% wholesale. So our main outlets are the Snohomish Farmers Market, which is just a mile and a half from us, really convenient location. And then due to COVID, we decided, with all the uncertainty around, we thought our local market was going to be closed. So we decided to do an online store. So that's really taken up a huge avenue for our revenue. So now it's just as big as our in-person farmers market. So we do an online store where people pick up on the farm once a week.
What did COVID change about all of it?
Well, pre-COVID, it was almost 50-50 between the farmers market and restaurants and one distributor. So we focused more on restaurant sales and wool wholesale. So, and we weren't doing the online store before COVID. We had thought about it in the past, but just, it wasn't really a necessary step. So we kept pushing it off. So it's almost, I'm almost not thankful for COVID, but having us really rethink and prioritize selling really direct to customers has been a great change.
Yeah. It is interesting how that kind of forced a lot of us to rethink how we were getting our produce to customers. I know for Hannah and I, we really reevaluated our property and realized we were really hard to access for customers. So people who just wanted to come pick up on the farm. So that's that was high in the calculus of us actually moving farms to a place where we could have a farm store and that sort of thing. Tell us a little bit about your history. Tell us a little bit about your, how you got to the farm and how you got into agriculture and those sorts of things.
Yeah. So I guess I just go back to in college, I started really getting into just, urban gardening and whatever rental we were at. And one of the summers I was able to get a paid summer internship through our school farm. It was actually student led, and we grew specifically for our local food bank up in Bellingham. And I didn't really appreciate it at the time, but it was actually a no-till style with permanent beds. We used a broad fork and heavy compost applications and wood chips on all the paths and stuff. So it was great to see that kind of hand-tended method from the start. And then through one of the farm managers, I got referred to another larger organic farm the next summer. It was a 10-acre organic farm called Broadleaf Farm up in just north of Bellingham. And I ran their farmers market booth that summer. And I think that's when I just really started falling in love with, the community aspect of how excited people were to get this just such vibrant, fresh produce and also just the really raw, satisfying nature of working with the farm with, some really fun people and being exhausted, but so fulfilled every day. After farming up in Bellingham, me and my partner, Sydney, we moved down to Bend, Oregon. And I was working even through college too, I was working at local native plant restoration companies, which I know you've talked about too, how it's a really comparable career path and really useful to have some of those skills. So I definitely agree with you there. So I was kind of deciding between these two career paths of restoration work and then farming. And I just couldn't wrap my head around how I was going to start a farm, when most of my examples were, these larger 10-acre farms with multiple tractors, large barns and greenhouses, and just how capital intensive they were. It never really seemed like that's something I would be able to do. It was that winter though that I got a hold of JM's book, and it kind of all clicked to me that I didn't have to, that I could go about it with a small scale, without a tractor. All the big barriers that I had kind of thought about kind of disappeared. So with that like reinvigorated sense that I could do this, I tried to find some local farms to work on in the Bend area, like just, Central Oregon. But they were really all unpaid internships or stipend based, and I didn't really want to like go back and do that after already having a couple seasons on farms. So I luckily just at a local farm conference, I met an older gentleman who was carrying around James' book, and he was trying to find someone to rent essentially his hobby farm. He had, multiple greenhouses and a fenced in field that had irrigation. And so I just gave it a go. That was 2015, almost 7 years ago. And yeah, we were down in Oregon for 3 years before moving up to Snohomish, where we are now, which is my hometown. So we moved up here to be closer to family. So yeah, I'm happy to be here and on permanent land now. Through, our help of both our families. We're really fortunate to be able to have applied all these lessons that I developed on lease land now to permanent land, so we can make some smart investments in infrastructure and not waste a lot of time and money.
Yeah, there are a couple things in there. One, this gentleman walking around with James' book looking for somebody to help him on his property. That's like the best. Everybody should use that method that is looking for people to take over their property. It's brilliant.
Yeah, I think it was a pretty hilarious image, and it was just kind of like perfect timing, that I think he probably had the similar experience where he was, a huge follower of Elliot Coleman, and then when James' book came around, he was sold on that, and so we were both kind of caught the bug at the same time, and just really lucky and to have, that opportunity on land where everything was kind of there for me. So my initial investments were so little. He even had like a DCS. So really all I was buying was seeds and a couple tools and row cover,
Yeah. And I think that part about the capital intensive, this is something I think JM gets a lot of credit for sort of adding the, profitability element, but but he also deserves credit for pointing out like how these farms could be much lower in capital, for startup. And I think that's like something that it doesn't get talked about enough in his sort of contributions.
Totally. I mean, I think a lot of us are first generation farmers, so we don't have like all that family history and resources to, step into farming. And, even me, like, I have generational family wealth that, helped us acquire land and stuff, which you can imagine people who don't have, they're not first generation, or they're first generation farmers, and they also have no family generational wealth. I mean, it's impossible.
Before we started talking, you were talking about the first years of your farm, and like I was bemoaning the mud on my farm, on the new farm, because I had forgotten about mud.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about those first years, like starting up that farm and what kind of went into it, and describe that a little bit?
Yeah, it was pretty amazing to have those first 3 years of farming to really, develop our just systems, really get things dialed in and kind of find which crops we preferred, and knew exactly kind of what scale we wanted to arrive at, so that when we moved to this new spot, we could really like lay out the farm with like a long-term vision of infrastructure and not like have to, rearrange the layout every year or so. So the first year we built like a 30 by 48 greenhouse, and, a third of it was our propagation area. And then the rest of it was just like for tomatoes and early and late greens. And then we put up 2 caterpillar tunnels, and we probably only had a 1/4 acre on top of that. that first year. We also had to do, trenching, irrigation, because it was just a pasture before, so there was no infrastructure before we arrived here. What's really cool too is, we're just on a residential property, and it had a pretty big garage, so we've totally converted the garage to be a wash pack station. And there was even just like a little canning room in the garage that we insulated and turned into a walk-in cold room. So it's been funny just kind of like retrofitting a residential property into like a commercial farm. It's been a fun process.
Yeah, no, it's such an interesting process. Like starting a farm is like, it's this weird blank palette that you kind of get to mold a little bit. And then a few years later, you realize like it's kind of become its own thing.
Like, I think you've talked about this too. It's like, I think I had this vision for this, perfect little square farm property that's perfectly flat and sunny and, just having no restrictions in terms of land. But like the property we ended up with, is very land restrictive. We're pretty much already kind of maxed out what we can grow on this property in terms of land space. So, in an ideal world, I think I would continue to build these high tunnels just for like winter greens in specific, just because there's such a demand for greens in the winter in our area, and there's not a lot of growers doing it. But we're kind of maxed out on like flat ground that we could build greenhouses. So we're just, looking more now to expand into like late maturing cold hardy field crops and storage things too that we could sell through the winter.
Yeah. So what does your winter stuff look like? Like what's, we're talking in late February. What's the tunnel situation right now?
Yeah, it's late February. Our tunnels are mainly full right now of spinach, claytonia, some baby greens like red Russian kale and mustards, like a mesclun mix. And we've seeded carrots a couple weeks ago or a month ago now that are coming up. So most of these things were planted, September, and maybe went in the ground the beginning of October or so, and kind of taking the place over our summer crops like tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, basil. So yeah, we don't rely a ton on our winter sales, but it's, it keeps me busy and helps offset a lot of the costs of just having the greenhouses up and stuff. So yeah, we might sell a few $100s a week or so, but yeah, that's in the greenhouses. In terms of the field, we usually harvest, through December, out in the field. But then after that, we've kind of exhausted all of our carrots. Our kale plants are kind of picked out and leeks are finished. So that's usually when we finish selling all our field crops.
Okay. Maybe give us a little bit of idea of your climate. I think isn't Washington kind of divided in half, like half of it is dry and half of it's kind of super wet? Like that's what I think of with Washington. Like, can you give us a little bit describe where you are in terms of your, moisture and then also like temperatures?
Yeah, I think that was one of the reasons I was really excited to move back up here is we do have a pretty temperate climate. Technically it's a temperate rainforest. We kind of have a Mediterranean climate where it's really rainy spring, fall and winter, but then we have really dry, warm summers. And like you said, Washington State is split by the Cascades. So I'm in Western Washington with, more of the wet climate, and then Eastern Washington is very dry and hot in the summers, but colder in the winters. So yeah, we have a pretty unique climate. We're so far north, so we're limited by daylight in the winter, but we're zone 8B. It hardly ever gets below 20 degrees in the winter, and yeah, averaging maybe 40 degrees or so. So we're able to. All of the brassicas do amazing here over the winter. we could overwinter leeks. I leave carrots out in the field into December that I could harvest fresh from, even beets. Parsley does all right. So yeah, we're pretty lucky about how late we could harvest out in the season.
Nice. Okay. Let's talk a few different crops. I want to at least a couple. Some of these things that you do, it seems like you do really well, that I can at least see from the images online. Things like beets. Can you give us the rundown on your beet production?
Yeah, I'd love to. So in the past, we were direct seeding, but after getting the paper pot, we moved to using that method. So we've been using Boro variety and Touchstone Gold, just a red and gold variety. And we're using the paper pot 4-inch chains, and we do 3 rows per our 30-inch beds. And we're kind of thinning those chains too before we planting them to at least 1 or 2 plants per cell, because beets will germinate like 3 or more. So I appreciate being able to thin those in the cells rather than crawling on the ground in the beds. We succession plant these every 3 weeks or so, and then we do a large fall planting too, or a large planting like July 15th to have like a big crop for the fall winter. And after planting, usually it's like 2 or 3 weeks. Then we do one cultivation just with some wire hose, and that's usually all we have to do before like the canopy kind of closes up and there's very little weed pressure after that. Also, we're planting into pretty thick compost. We use like the deep compost mulch system that you and so many others have talked about already. So
okay, and you don't have issues with the deep compost and the paper pot chains?
No, our compost is, it's been the supplier we get it from. It's already been sieved, so it's pretty fine.
Okay, so it's super fine. Yeah, that helps.
Yeah, the hard part about the deep compost system, I think, is we had to kind of relearn our irrigation schedule, and like it's so much pore space in our compost, and the drainage is so fast that, especially with the paper pot, cells are so small and thin, they dry out so fast. So we're having to water a little more frequently to establish plantings, but then obviously there's so much moisture underneath that top layer. So we definitely, there was a learning curve to that when we started switching to the deep compost system, and like having like, losing a few beds, like just because they dried out way faster than we were used to. We have overhead irrigation on everything, so we just kind of had to relearn our schedule and stuff. But we hardly get any rain here in the summer, so we're pretty dependent on irrigation. Yeah,
okay, that makes sense. I mean, I was going to say, if you were trying to do that on drip tape, it would be quite difficult.
Yeah. We only use drip tape in the greenhouses now, and I love overhead.
Yeah, I'm there with you. If you have the option of overhead, right? Drier climates, I guess, don't always, but when you have the option, it is a wonderful thing. The thinning of the beets too, I think, is like kind of an important note, because I've seen a lot of people doing multi-cell, leaving like 3 or 4 beets plants in a cell and then planting that, and I've never had great luck with that. And what I usually get is, and maybe you can back me up on this or maybe refute it, but I usually get like 1 good beet off that, and then I pull that beet, maybe 2 good beets, and I pull that like the best one, and then the others never size up.
Yeah.
That's been kind of my experience.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. That's why, it's been, I said 1 to 2, but I think most of the time we try to only have 1. It's just in each cell, and exactly. Like in the past, when we were thinning so evenly, or we were transplanting multi-sown, it was those those second round of beets that you're hoping to size up really never do. And as well as like, I don't want to be harvesting from one bed for like, a month or more. I would rather have a really heavy yield, and we usually only harvest from one beet bed for 2 weeks, and then we're able to replace it. So because they're maturing all at the same time.
Yeah, I've kind of run into the same thing where if they're just sitting there not maturing, then it's kind of just taking up space. And yeah, that can be so frustrating. Okay, I want to talk about another one. Can we do arugula?
Yeah. So for arugula, I'm usually planting it I think I went down to every 2 weeks. So I'm able to harvest usually at least get like 2 separate cuts from it. So we've been using Esme variety, which is a newer organic variety that Johnny's came out with, I think 2 years ago. And we do 6 rows with our Jang seeder. It's the XY24. So that's like the roller that we typically use for carrots, but it just kind of has happened to be a great density for our arugula too. And we have our gears. I can't remember the exact. I think it's like 9 and 14. It's the densest option, and we don't really ever change that. So like I said, we plant those every 2 weeks. We use the greens harvester on that, and having the 6 rows, having an even number is really nice for the greens harvester to have like 2 distinct halves, so it doesn't get really clogged up as you use the greens harvester. And then, just starting last year, we started using solarization to terminate our arugula beds. Same with, our mesclun beds or any baby greens. So that's been a huge time saver. In the past, we would use a wheel hoe to, flip an arugula bed, and then we'd rake up all the debris and take it out. But now we could just, after, if you're using the greens harvester and you're getting a low cut on it, you could just directly pull the clear plastic on after that, or we just have a little push mower handy that we would push on top of it and mow it as short as possible, and then pull the plastic, and it'll completely fry and terminate the crop in a couple days in the sun. And then we're able just to go back and add compost and a little fertilizer and plant directly into that.
That solarization method, it can be super fast, and I know that baby greens can be problematic when it comes to the amount of time it takes to flip a bed.
Totally, yeah. It's been cool to see, some of our greatest crops have come out of those beds that have been solarized. I think just like all that extra organic matter of the rotting leaves, and then like we're not removing any of that crop, so all those root structures just still in place. So the next crop has so much biology going into it.
Right. Yeah. Which, a lot of people sort of intuitively, I think, to some extent, think that the solarization is going to be super harmful for microbial life. But I think if it's left, it's really about duration. From the research that I've seen, it's really about duration. If you're leaving it on there for several weeks, then you're looking at a much greater and deeper damage than if you're leaving it on for, a couple days, like you said. Yeah.
It's just dependent too on like how warm it is, and as long as you have full sun, we can only really use it in the summer, like because it's so cloudy and rainy here. The rest of the year we can't use that method, but it's great for summer flips. And like you said, I only find it, it's only really warming up the soil in the top inch or so. Like right underneath that, it's still cool and there's worms and everything. So I'm not. If anything, maybe it'll kill some of the slugs on the surface. So.
What's your cloudy day flip? Like what do you do when you don't have the solarization option?
Yeah, so for like the shoulder season, we go back to using the wheel hoe, or if we have the advantage of time, we could tarp it either with silage tarps, or we just have like landscape fabric in smaller sections. But Um, that's only if you have, the luxury of time on your side, but usually we use the wheel hoe and hope ideally we would have already cut it pretty low. So you're just taking kind of the bottom half of the plant out. So yeah, we're just really barely going into the soil surface, but just like cutting it and then raking up the debris into piles and taking it out. But yeah, that's all by hand.
I want to do another crop if we can.
Oh, of course.
I'll leave it to you though. Do you want to do leeks or you want to do Brussels?
Yeah. How about we just do leeks?
All right, let's do it.
I think I like leeks more. Yeah. So for our leeks, we've been using a variety called Tadorno. It's kind of a late fall variety, and this is all we just chose that because that's kind of when we want to be selling leeks the most is late fall. So just depending on your market, I think there's so many great varieties out there, but we usually seed them in April, and we've been using the paper pot 6-inch chains. We do 3 rows per bed, and we're planting these into deep compost beds. We have to do a little more weeding means than most because they're going in at pretty small size. We've also, after a month of growing, we have like the zipper tool, so we'll go back and we can hill each row just a little bit. I find that helps just increase the amount of blanching that's going on. It's not like as much hilling as a lot of farms are going to be doing with hilling equipment and tractor, but I find it's enough to get a beautiful blanched stem and a good product. So usually from these, we seed them in April, they're planted out in May, and we're harvesting late September, and we kind of just clear each bed out and until we sell out. But leeks are amazing in our climate. They could overwinter. You could harvest them through the whole winter, even into February, before they start bolting. So yeah, I love leeks. They're great in our climate.
Yeah, that's okay. So with the paper pot, you're having to put those in pretty early. Like you said, they have to be pretty young. So
yeah,
because if you leave them in the paper pots, the roots are going to kind of latch onto the paper pot and ruin the chain, right? So with that, how long are they in the chains? Are they just in there until they're an inch or two tall, or like when you said starting them in April, like when are you roughly planting them?
So we start them in April, and we're only leaving them in the paper chains for a month. So yeah, they're not getting huge. For us, it's worth it just to be able to quickly plant them. But putting them in at that size, you do have to compete with weeds more. So it's if you have more weed pressure, it would probably be smart then to try to get them to grow for another month or more, to be able to skip, maybe a couple cycles of weeding.
Yeah, getting the good blanch on them has always been the struggle for me. Like we've been dibbling like pretty deep holes and dropping them in there, and it's just so time consuming. And I've seen some of the tools that are out, and I'm kind of intrigued by some of the deeper dibblers.
Like some of those foot planted ones.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe it'd be worth trying that for me one day, but that's an interesting, I like your approach, and I've seen the leeks and they seem like they have a pretty good blanch on them. So obviously it's effective.
Yeah. Ours aren't like crazy blanched, and I know I think Jam kind of popularized that of trying to get the biggest blanch on theirs, but like, I don't know if it's worth that amount of dibbling and dropping each one into that huge hole. Like, that's not what they do commercially, and I've never had a problem selling them. I think they taste amazing, and I've never heard someone complain that it's not blanched enough. So I'm happy to do less work.
Right. Hey, you all, just jumping in real quick to get a word from our sponsors like Tilth Soil. Tilth Soil makes NOP-compliant living potting soils in Cleveland, Ohio. With food scraps they haul and compost themselves. Each batch of soil is tested against the competitors and the results are in. Plants vote for Tilth Soil. To learn more about their full line of products, please visit www.tilthsoil.com. This show is also brought to you by you, the patrons. Did you know we have almost 600 patrons at patreon.com/no-till-growers? Like I said at the top of this show, I will be shouting out everyone who signs up in the month of April, and as always, anyone who bumps up from one level to another. So, big shout outs this week to John Bonaparte, Ojai Roots, Scott Harris, Dan Fort, Earth Care Farmer, Jane Murner Cynical, Asia Smith, Rimmel Greenhouse Systems, Scott Snodgrass, Andrew and Haley Keeler from Avoda Sustainable Acres, Jody Miller, Shane and Emma of Aslan Organics, Tony Lopez, Clement, Thomas Eliason, Travis and Heidi of Arcadia Acres, Judson Taylor, John Mills, Grown Up Farm, Jacob Arthur, Clara Coleman, Wild Mountain Seeds, Bob and Ann Patton of Hexhamshire Organics, Jared Kirst, Jay Armour, Dan Brisebois, C-Mac Small, Jay McCombs, Tim Baldwin, Marc-Andre Giroux, Jessica Merrick, Esoterra Culinary, Steve Larson, Fiona and Donnie of Firefly Farm, Jean-Martin Fortier, Yannick Laplante, and Jen Lawrence. Huge thanks to all of our show supporters. And if you want a shout out in the month of April, make sure to sign up at patreon.com/no-till-growers. All right, back to James. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about, I mean, you mentioned using kind of the deep compost mulch system. Can you talk a little bit about your, like your application rate and then how you're applying it? Are you just using wheelbarrows and that sort of thing?
Yeah, like you mentioned, we've really adopted the deep compost mulch system that, thanks to your work and Ben Hartman and Singing Frogs Farm, they really sold it for us. And just doing our own experiments and especially with things like carrots, we were on new ground. This used to be really weedy pasture ground, and we were applying maybe an inch or two of compost at first and just getting flooded with weed seed, and then just realizing, okay, let's just go heavy on the compost. And oh my God, now we have very little weeding to do. And just why don't we do this for all of our crops? It's going to be worth it. So yeah, we've kind of continually gone for deeper applications, especially in the spring. Yeah. So for breaking new ground, usually in the summer, I'll mow the grass down really short and we'll tarp it, late summer, at least for 6 months through the winter. And then in the early spring, we could pull it back. And that's when we apply lime. We have kind of acidic soils here. So we apply lime to kind of get more of a neutral pH. And then we till and shape our beds. And then we're adding, trying to get 4 inches of compost. So this usually turns out to be 4 to 5 wheelbarrows or more per bed. And so far, we haven't been adding wood chips in the past, but we're starting to experiment with things in our garlic zone, and especially other crops winter squash, really long season crops. We found it's worth it. So yeah, that's for a new application. For established beds, we usually only add 2 wheelbarrows in the spring, and then between crop rotations, we'll just add maybe 1. So it's definitely getting less and less. And yeah, like I said, we use silage tarps over the winter. So ideally we would incorporate more cover crops, but we're such a small size, and we're able to harvest our crops so late into the season that we don't always have the window to get a good cover crop stand in. So we're relying heavily on these silage tarps to kind of protect the soil from erosion, and it's pretty amazing just to be able to peel them back in spring and have this perfect slate that's we see this beautiful growth of mycelium all over our compost, and just all the worm activity and decomposing organic matter from the crop residues, and even like vole and mold activity, the beds are really fluffy. So for that first succession, usually we don't even have to use a broad fork, which is amazing to save that time. Yeah, and the compost we're getting it's from a local landscaping company called Lens Enterprises up here. We're using their organic compost, and it has a lot of like woody feedstock, like branches, leaves, and even like ground up stumps. So because of how woody it is, we do still use like a lot of feather meal, and we use azomite and even kelp meal for some of the micronutrients. Yeah, so, and we take annual soil tests to kind of help refine our like general fertility plan. And we're still having to add like gypsum every year, which is similar to lime, just to help with the pH problem. Yeah.
Right. And in the soil testing, like are you seeing a lot of nutrient excess from all the compost?
Yeah, I was worried about that, but it hasn't been a problem. That's kind of why I'm preferring this compost that's more woody. It doesn't have, any animal products in it. So it's not that high in NPK. Only area we were kind of worried about is in our greenhouses that, are going on their fourth year. For a little bit, we were seeing some excess salts. But I just kind of backed down on our nitrogen application in there, and it seems to have really helped. And we did a couple like heavy flushes of water that just kind of help flush those salts out. So yeah, because we're not using feather meal too, it's our main nitrogen source, but it doesn't tend to be as high in salts as like, a more general like chicken manure fertilizer or something like that.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear about the, in the tunnels, and that is generally like what's recommended is do some sort of leaching. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about disease and or pest issues if you have any. I know that in wetter climates like that, disease can be an issue. Are there any standout pest and disease issues that you would be down to talk about?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, I think this was like, a huge struggle for me, like having kind of established the farm in the high desert of Central Oregon, like kind of getting used to that unique climate and pest pressure, and then moving here and just having it be like completely opposite climate. It was definitely, a steep learning curve that I've relied heavily just on, some of my farming friends and local farming community to constantly be troubleshooting and asking questions. I think some of the notable ones for me, when we first started this, when we moved to this property, I kind of had the goal of like having salad mix be our biggest crop. So we were starting to plant, large amounts of like Salanova lettuce and head lettuce. And then we discovered that our property was like infested with wireworm, which is a pretty common soil pest in Western Washington. And it was just, it bores through the main stem of lettuce. And so we're just seeing, 80% losses in all of our beds that first year. So it was pretty devastating. So for a while, I was changing our crop plan a lot and troubleshooting all these different things. And now what really seemed to work the best is we've done 1 to 2 applications per year of beneficial nematodes. And we've even like doubled the application rate in in the main problem areas. That was just, through someone's recommendation on Instagram, I think. It's been great. We've been getting them just from a company called Arbico Organics, and it's called Nematac, and it's the specific thing is called SC beneficial nematodes. That's like the species and genus abbreviated, but it's pretty amazing. I was really hesitant to, you're just kind of spraying this water and you don't see anything. It just seems like so much faith is going into it, but we've seen a huge decline in their population, and now we're able to do, lettuce profitably again, and our carrots, and it's been great to see that pest kind of disappear. Besides wireworms, over in this area too, we have flea beetle really bad, so we just use thin row cover over like arugula, bok choy for those things, and our hawk rye turnips. It doesn't seem to bother any of our other brassicas as much. In terms of other pests, we have aphids, of course. That hasn't resulted in very many losses, but we also have really high pressure of like cabbage moth worm on especially our fall brassicas. So for the longest time, I was adamant that I wasn't even going to spray like any organic OMRI certified pesticides, but this last year we were just having such bad damage that we talked to some other growers, and we started, we did some applications of the BT organic pesticide. It's a bacterium that infects, that genus of worms. So it's not like a broad spectrum, and it's been incredible to knock down some of those heavy populations.
Yeah, that's the Bacillus thuringiensis is exactly. Fairly effective. What about disease? Any sort of like fungal? Like, have you had any issues with that?
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you reminded me about fungal diseases. Because we have such a wet climate, only a couple months in the summer where it's dry. Also, like, we're in a river valley, so we have really heavy fogs, even in the summer. Sometimes the fog will be around. It won't even burn off till like 11 or so. And so just all that high humidity and dew on the leaves, we've really struggled with some new fungal diseases like downy mildew on our spinach and onions, rust on a lot of our alliums. So, we kind of had to rethink and talk to some seed companies to find varieties that were more resistant. Like, for example, spinach, which I've never really had downy mildew in the field on spinach, but it happened here. So just talking to like a seed rep over at Osborne Seed Company, we were able to find some varieties that were more resistant to downy mildew in our specific region, because that's what has been amazing working with like local reps. Like, they could actually tell you what your downy mildew races are. I didn't know any of that information on my own. So just finding resistant varieties has been the main thing. And then also only using our overhead irrigation in the morning so that it could dry out by nighttime, so it's not sitting there wet all night, has been also really important for us.
Yeah, that tip about talking to your seed reps, I think is a really good one. That's one that probably people don't think that much about, but is definitely an option. We have seed reps reach out to us all the time, and I usually just do my own thing, but I hadn't thought about actually contacting them and being like, hey, in our region, what's the best variety for this? Do you know what those downy mildew resistant ones for your region were for the spinach?
Yeah, I think there's quite a bit of them now. For our region, I ended up kind of preferring a variety called Kiowa. It's my main like summer spinach too. It got one of the greatest bolt resistance varieties, so that's the one we've really leaned on. But there's several that we prefer to for the winter, and that tend not to have the same kind of pressures for some reason as their summer downy mildew. And then of course, like onions, we're trying Yankee, which is the only downy mildew resistant variety I've seen. It's been weird. Like, we used to do a lot of scallions, and I think we're going to stop doing them this year just because there's no downy mildew resistant varieties. And we started using a product called Feast too, which is an organic fungicide, but it's a biological fungicide. So it's spraying a bacterium that outcompetes, some of the fungal diseases like rust. So I feel pretty good about using that. It's not like a broad spectrum, organic fungicide. It's very specific. So we started spraying that on like leeks and even garlic to try to prevent or at least deter some of the rust from kind of stunting the growth. And it's worked pretty good. I just always, I don't love spraying anything. It's just not even just spraying it, just remembering to adding that to our schedule. It's always like the last thing I think to do.
Right. Yeah. It's never, it's something that we've backed off a lot on. And sometimes I wonder if I'm overdoing it, like if I'm being a little bit too dogmatic about that. But I think that's also plays into it. It's just like putting it on the schedule and going out and finding time to just, go out and spray. That's also part of it. You mentioned tools. You mentioned, like the zipper and the paper pot. And have there been any big tool, successes or failures this year? Anything that's like really stood out as of late that's been super helpful, or that you tried and just did not fly?
Yes, both successes and failures. I think, it's not like super sexy or fancy, but I think just like finding for our weed management, we just have our Valley Oak wheel hoe, I think is the brand. And, we use that for all our walking paths and edges, and even down like the middle of row of like broccoli or something with wider spacing. And then that's something we've had from the beginning, but I think 2 years ago, we got sold on Connor Crickmore's like Mutineer with the multiple interchangeable heads. So yeah, I'm a big fan of wire weeders, and I really like just the simplicity of having one hoe and then just being able to in the field interchange the heads based on crop spacing. So like having my employee just in one hand they wheel over the wheel hoe, and then in the other they have the wooden handle, and then around their belt buckle, they've got all the heads they need. And just the simplicity of being able to go out there just with two tools and quickly cultivate, a field at a time has been amazing. Just to kind of simplify everything so that it's really easy for, our two employees and me to manage without thinking too hard about it.
And then what's on the bust side?
I think a main one for me was, in terms of, buying a tool that just didn't really work in our system was the flame weeder. We had bought like the 5-torch model from flameweeders.com. And I think it's great, if you have the right system. But for us, as we were starting to transition more of it into a deep compost mulch system, like we didn't get those really concentrated flushes of weeds, like, a week or two after seeding crops. We had initially bought it to flame weed carrots, but we don't get that flush of weeds like we used to. So it's kind of become obsolete. And also like, because our compost is so woody, and especially in the summer it can get dry, like I just didn't feel safe about torching all this woody debris. And it's also just my least favorite thing, pushing around with a propane tank. It's just like, I just realized that like it was going to be the last thing I would do on the farm. So we ended up selling it and to another farmer who's more tillage based, and it works great for them, but it was not the best tool for our system.
Yeah, we found the same thing. I just think like I think it can be really effective in a tillage situation when you're dealing with more of those weeds. And it was for us before we, started relying more heavily on compost mulches. But yeah, we never knew, we got it for this it was like the exact same story. And I have the same feeling about it. Like it is when we no longer use it. When I would have that propane tank and the flame going, I caught the paths on fire a couple times. And I was just always like, I don't own anything dangerous. Like nothing we use is ever dangerous except for this. Why do we have it?
Yeah.
It's always just freaked me out.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's part of the thing is like, it's not just how effective it is. It's like, do I enjoy using this? Like, is it simple, And no, it wasn't for me.
Yeah. I mean, it works. It certainly works in certain systems, but we found much what you did. You mentioned employees. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? What's your employee situation? Are they year round?
Yeah. Yeah. In terms of employees, I mainly have 2 part-time employees who are seasonal based. The main season is like March through October, and then one of them stays on through December for some of more like wholesale harvest. Yeah, and so right now I'm this is the first time I've had returning employees I have Sarah, my main employee, who's coming back for her 3rd year, and Allie, another part-time worker, come back for her 2nd year. So it's been incredible to have that, that knowledge from an employee who's been here so long. And we have such like a set schedule to our week where there's very little I need to communicate anymore to get, the daily objectives done. Besides like taking a farm walk together, and we go over some of the the more nuanced things of which needs to get cultivated and which beds we're flipping that week. But in terms of harvest, we have our harvest list, and they've been planting and cultivating throughout the season, so they kind of know where everything is too. So it's amazing to be able to spread the responsibility out finally. And my main employee, she's in charge of microgreens, so she does all the feedings. She's also in charge of washing all the greens and packing them all. So these are things that I didn't even do at all last year. And that's amazing to pass on these bigger responsibilities.
Yeah. And then do you intend or want to get to the point when you're employing year round?
Yeah, I think, that's definitely a dream of mine is to be able to offer year round employment. It just so works out that she, in the past, she was a teacher, and now she's a substitute teacher. So I think, she just picks that up in the winter when she wants more work. And then my other employee has another part-time, online tech job that she could pick up. It's very flexible. So, it's really lucky that we were able to find these people who had kind of side jobs to that were really beneficial in terms of flexibility. But I would love to be able to employ someone year round, but what that will take is really focusing on more winter production. So we do a great job with our greenhouses, but I think I'll have to expand just a little bit to do more like large fall plantings of carrots, beets, and our brassicas to kind of be able to have stuff to harvest through December, even into January.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that, because I was curious, like what you feel like the limitations are to get you to that point when you're able to employ somebody year round. Because I think about that too. I mean, it often does come down to either really intense summer production so that you have that cushion to get through the winter, or pretty, going a little bit heavier on the winter production.
Yeah. And in terms of just like, it's not like that fun to work outside in the winter here, but also like I don't want to be working more hours in the summer. So I would prefer like having, it more a well-rounded year schedule, so we could have some steady work in the winter instead of, working overtime in the summer.
Yeah. Well, James, thank you so much for your time. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Jesse. It's been great talking to you. And just, thanks so much for all the work you do. you've educated so many people and brought so many great examples to life, so people can really, apply this to their own context. And I think I just want to like give a thanks to my partner Sid, who's I'm like a single owner business, but there's been so many people throughout my career, who have been here. So my partner Sid, who's been at every single market and is always helping me think through all the big farm decisions, and then our respective families, and also just my local farming community here in Snohomish, in the valley around here. I rely so heavily on, all my farming friends to be able to troubleshoot and like ask any question. We do bulk purchasing together, and I rent a lot of equipment from farms, so I don't have to buy my own sometimes. So yeah, just want to like highlight the importance of building a local farm community too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those things are all important, and shout out to Sid. And well, again, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. All right, if you enjoyed that episode, make sure to follow Radical Roots Farm on Instagram and all the places. We will hook it up with links in the show notes. Also, please make sure to sign up for the Patreon page. I will be shouting out every single person who signs up this month at any level. And of course, as always, I'll shout out those who bump up as well. And a technical note, if you want your farm name to be shouted out, you'll have to add it to your profile name. Also, if you want me not to butcher the pronunciation, please add that in parentheses to your name on Patreon. That's super helpful. Anywho, make sure you are subscribed to all the stuff we do, from No-Till Flowers to Growers Live to the Winter Growers podcast and our forthcoming collaborative farming podcast hosted by Jackson Roulette. And of course, make sure you are subscribed to this podcast wherever you are getting it and leave a review. But this week, all reviews must describe what you would do if you thought your farm drained well, because it seemed to drain well in the late fall and early winter, only to find out it's kind of a giant mud pit, because that's kind of what I'm going through right now on our farm. How do reviews work again? Big thanks as always to Jackson Roulette and Josh Satin for their help, two people who I neglected to shout out in my interview with John Kempf, but are, of course, integral to my work. Huge thanks to Willie Breeding, who some could argue also got snubbed in the shout outs for his work on such hits as this podcast theme and the theme song of Winter Growers podcast. Some would also maybe not argue that. And of course, the keystone to it all, Hannah Crabtree. Huge thank you to my amazing wife and farm partner for all the things. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye. It's been like snow and ice for the last 2 weeks, and then today it's finally like today and yesterday were actually nice. So I got some carrots in the ground for the first on the new farm, and I'm pretty excited about that.
That's awesome. Is that in one of your tunnels or something? Yeah, we're putting them in.
We do them in cat tunnels. So we'll do the first rounds in cat tunnels, and then our first like field ones will go in March. Like March 15th is usually my goal for my first like big carrot planting. So yeah, and then we'll do them like kind of every month. And we just in June and July we just like as many as we can get in the ground.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Just get ready for the fall planting.
Yeah, and then just like July and August we can sell, every carrot we can bring to market. So it's just, we try and get as many in the ground as we can.
Is that just because, do you have like a tourist area? Why is that your top, you just sell more that month?
I don't know. July's always our top month.
Yeah.
Tourism is an element, but I don't know. I don't know. I just think we're the only people with carrots.
Yeah.
And we become like the carrot people, and that's, I don't know. Yeah, it's funny. Carrots and beets, like nobody bothers. So we just, clean up. And
well, that's awesome.
Yeah. So we've tried to up our carrot game a little bit, and we'll see how this year goes. Last year was a little slower because of COVID, but
yeah, I love carrots.
Carrots are great. Now,
it's a satisfying crop.
Yeah, once you get rid of the weed issue, it's one of the best. Mm-hmm. So much fun to grow, and I could just eat carrots all day long. I literally make myself sick every harvest just eating carrots.